I am a child of the revolution, born into conflict. My twin sister and I were born in Tehran in 1978. Food has always represented love and community in my family. I come from a big, close-knit family, and when it was time to eat, you didn't know where the table started and where it ended. We ate on a long, beautiful piece of tapestry, covered in my grandmother's delicious Persian food. One side of the table filled with children, and the other side, my elders. Takes a village, they say. In 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. The 8 years of war brought exhaustion, economic devastation, and fear. When the sirens would go off, my grandmother would be holding her pot of homemade food in one hand, and she would use the other hand to hurry us grandkids down into the underground bunker. When we were down there, she would feed us with her hands. One day, being the smart-ass kid I was, I said to her, "Why do you always feed us when we're down here?" She replied, "Do you want to die hungry? Food feeds the soul." My childlike brain thought, "No, I don't want to die hungry." But my adult-like brain now knows that it was a great distraction. My father was involved with the Shah's regime. And when Khomeini took power in Iran, he knew that if that was revealed, that we would be in grave danger. In 1985, he got word that one of his co-workers had been captured and tortured for names, and that his name was possibly revealed. We had just bought our first brand new apartment, just furnished it. We were so excited. But there was no question. We had to flee immediately. Leaving Iran came with many complications. There was a law in Iran that you could not leave with any valuables. My father meticulously sewed all of the jewelry and money into the coats on my sister and I's jackets that we would be wearing at the airport. He also put valuables in toothpaste tubes. The airport was a scary scene. It was like a war zone. There were men holding guns. Our jackets were so heavy. We were so hot. So we kept fidgeting and fidgeting and fidgeting. And at some point, my mother got down on her knees, face to face with us. She said, "If you keep fidgeting, we will not make it out of here alive." I swallowed, held my sister's hand, and stood still. In 1985, we arrived in the US on a tourist visa with twice as much luggage than any tourist should show up in this country with. My parents opened the first Persian restaurant in the area. They called it Market Plaza, named after the streets it was located on. We badly wanted to name it an ethnic name, but ethnic restaurants weren't the norm those days, and we didn't want to scare off customers. My father put items on the menu like chicken kebab and fettuccine. Customers would come in with what they were familiar with. They would have the fettuccine and then try a little of this and a little of that, and before they knew it, they were familiar with Persian food. When we were 13, my sister and I missed family terribly. My parents decided to send us back to Iran to visit my grandparents for the summer. It had been 6 years since we had left, and my father thought that we were in the clear. When my sister and I reached the airport in Tehran, we immediately knew that was not the case. The police asked us to stand aside. They took our passports. We realized that my father had been blacklisted. After hours of questioning, the police realized we didn't know anything, So they allowed us to go live with my grandparents. But they confiscated our passports and basically held us hostages in hopes to lure my father back to Iran. We went to high school in Tehran, never knowing if we would be able to come back to the States or see our parents. My grandparents were observant, devout Muslims with very strict rules. We could not talk to boys or go to parties. We were two American teenagers, and all we wanted to do was talk to boys and go to parties. One night at 1 a.m. in winter, I had a brilliant idea in my 13-year-old brain. I was going to sneak out of the house and go to a party. I called the taxi with a very soft voice and said, "Do not ring the doorbell," so my grandmother wouldn't wake up. I snuck out of the side door of the house. I proceeded to walk barefoot on the snow, holding my shoes. And as I got to the gate of the house, I hear the taxi driver, who misunderstood me, speaking to my grandmother. He said, "Your taxi's here, ma'am." And my grandmother said, "Are you nuts? It's 1 a.m. I knew I was in trouble. I snuck back in through the side door of the house. I went into the pantry, and I had another brilliant idea in my 13-year-old brain. I took off my dressy clothes, proceeded to walk in the kitchen very calmly, and told my grandmother I was just grabbing a glass of water. My grandmother took one look at me in my bra and underwear and said, "Prophet Muhammad, help me." Not only she was sneaking out of the house, she was sneaking out of the house naked. No, I insisted I was just grabbing water. Rush off into your room before I have a stroke. And don't forget, I have raised 4 daughters. My grandfather had 3 heart attacks in the 5 years we were in Iran. We caused one of those, if not all 3. The relationship between us and my grandparents was filled with conflict, but it was also filled with love. We changed each other in ways that neither one of us could have ever imagined. After 5 long years, we graduated high school. They allowed our passports to come back to us, and they let us free. In the 5 years that we were gone, my parents had closed the first restaurant and opened their second, with many struggles. They could not afford to pay for rent and the investment it took to open a new restaurant. So they literally slept on the restaurant floor to get it on its feet. It was called the Persian House Restaurant. It had Persian carpets on the wall, Iranian history, and felt like home. When I was 18, I came back to the States. I started working 2 jobs, going to school, and living in downtown Portland. Every day, when I would get off at Nordstrom, I would walk a few blocks up on Morrison and start working at the restaurant. At the Persian House, we focused on Persian cuisine. We tweaked the recipes just a little bit to appeal to American customers. It was an amazing setting. We had these amazing customers. We had customers that started coming to a restaurant when they were dating. And 25 plus years later, they had kids in college. We had a customer that had just started driving for TriMet. And 25 plus years later, we held his retirement party. By that time, he had fallen in love with the culture, went to PSU, and could speak fluent Farsi. My parents introduced Portland to Persian culture and Persian cuisine. At the Persian house, our most popular dish on the menu was called fesenjan. It was a breast of marinated chicken, marinated in yogurt, turmeric, and saffron. It was topped off with a pomegranate and crushed walnut sauce. My mother would gently nudge customers to try the eggplant appetizer called nas katun. Customers would ask, "What does that mean?" And my mother would say, "It means flirtatious lady." Because the pomegranate syrup flirts between the sour and the sweet. Our other popular dish was our lamb shank. It simmered overnight in a Persian allspice. When you picked up the bone, that tender meat just fell off. It was served with a saffron, dill, and fava bean rice, topped off with caramelized onions and garlic. I could taste it now. Our restaurant succeeded because we were family-owned and operated. Our out-of-town customers would rave about how clean and how safe Portland was. In March of 2020, we took a huge economic hit due to the pandemic. We were shut down for months. And when we tried to do to-go food, it wasn't successful, and we didn't know if we would survive. The first night of the riots in May of 2020 changed the whole trajectory of our lives. My family was at my house for a family dinner. We were watching the news. We were watching everything unfold in downtown. The rioters, the looters, and we were watching it inch closer and closer to the restaurant. When it hit that target, kitty corner to our restaurant, I asked my father to check the cameras. He did. They were offline. We all jumped in the car and drove as fast as we could downtown. We came up 11th Avenue and parked the very same street you guys are sitting on right now. We ran down the street, around the corner on Morrison, and my heart sank. The restaurant was demolished. We walked in through where the window used to be, and there were still looters in there. I was so angry. I stood in the middle of that restaurant screaming, "Get out! Get out!" And by the time the place was cleared, I looked over at my mother, and she was devastated. The place that she had put blood, sweat, and tears into, gone in one night. Our beautiful hardwood floors were all scratched up because of all the glass. The booths were all slashed with knives. Those beautiful carpets on the wall were either stolen or they were badly damaged. As I walked towards the kitchen, I saw all of the refrigerators open, food, alcohol stolen, electronics. I entered into the kitchen and felt this immense heat and this smell. I realized that the looters had turned on all of the stove burners. At that moment, I started getting anxiety that I needed to protect my family. I grabbed 2 bottles of wine, half empty, the ones we had served just the night before. I went out in front of the restaurant and I stood there with these 2 bottles of wine for protection in case we needed it. I looked around and was watching everything happening in downtown. I kept turning around and urging my parents and my family that we had to leave for our safety. My father said he needed to grab 2 things out of the kitchen, 2 things that had sentimental value to him. One, a picture of his parents that sat in that kitchen for 30 years to remind him of his roots. The second, an oil-soaked flag, American flag, that reminded him that he had reached the American dream. As my family was leaving, I looked back, and my father is closing the door to the restaurant. His hands is shaking, and I was shocked. He's the strongest man I know. Dad, what are you doing? The entire front door is all exposed. I have locked this door every night for 30 years. That restaurant was his baby, and I had a gut feeling this was the beginning of the end. The next day, the Portland community came out and helped us clean up. Our customers started a GoFundMe to help with the costs to rebuild. But ultimately, in May of 2021, exactly 1 year after the first night of the riots, we closed our doors for good, after serving the community for 30 years. That last night, longtime customers, former employees, friends and family came out to support us. I grew up in downtown Portland. This is my home. We work, we gather, we eat, and we live here. Let's heal it. We need to bring that Portland back. We need to rebuild this city. We could do it. My family made a commitment to this city in 1985, and we are here to see it succeed. We believe in this city. We believe in its people. Takes a village, they say.